Hi everyone! Welcome back to another episode of Angie's Tangents. Today is very interesting because it is currently Saturday 30th of May as I'm filming this, 9:30 p.m. and Arsenal have a Champions League final to play. And originally I was actually gonna go out, but in this weather I just can't be arsed. So I'm filming a video instead. So today I wanted to do a video that has been on my mind for quite a while, and actually one of the videos that really was sort of the catalyst on the reason why I wanted to make videos, and that is a video talking about beauty standards. I actually have filmed this video maybe about 3 times now. The first one, I wasn't really happy with what I was saying. And then the second one, the audio messed up. So fingers crossed that this one actually works. But yeah, let's get into it without any further ado. If I'm being honest, I've been also putting it off for a while because I feel like it's a topic that is so universally experienced, yet so personal to everyone. And I personally want to talk about how I navigated 2 different beauty standards with 2 different sets of rules because I grew up between 2 countries. So firstly, I do want to give context because I think with most things it's important to kind of give a basis of understanding. I am actually fully Indonesian. I hate the word, but it's the word that most Indonesians use, and that word is pribumi. And I know that might be a shock to some of you guys because my whole life I have been mistaken as Chindo, which is Chinese Indonesian. But my ancestry is as Indonesian as it gets. Like, my great-grandparents were Indonesian before Indonesia even existed. And if you're wondering how I ended up looking like this, my only answer to that is take it to God, because I've been trying to find out too for the last 25 years. But in all seriousness, for the people who don't know, Indonesia is a very big country. I mean, we have 17,000 islands, hundreds upon hundreds of different ethnic groups and that kind of stuff. And so if we're being specific, my dad is 110% Minang. So from my mom, who is my paternal grandmother, I know her side more because her side is the one that is a little bit more documented than my oppa side, who is my paternal grandfather. She is 100% Minang, born in Sawah Lunto. And she's Pariaman, so that is also another ethnic group within Minangkabau. And then for my oppa, I honestly think he might have Melayu ancestry within him. He just holds a lot of the Melayu features, but from what I know, he is from Padang Kota, which is like the city of Padang. So my dad's side is very simple and very easy and gets straight to the point. My mom's side is where it gets a bit more confusing because technically she is predominantly Javanese. So whenever people ask me, you know, which part of Indonesia are you from, I would always say Minang and Javanese. But that is not entirely correct because whilst my family is predominantly Javanese, my kakung, who is my maternal grandfather, was also half Bangka Belitung, and he was actually born there, but his dad is from Jogja. And then my uti is where it gets even more confusing because she is predominantly Javanese as well, but she is a quarter Sundanese because she spoke Sundanese with her grandfather. But we don't really claim that, to be honest, because if I say, oh, I'm Minang, Javanese, and Sundanese, it's a little bit more, not confusing, but it's just, I grew up more with the Minang and the Javanese side of my family, not really the Sundanese side. So that is basically a rundown of my background. Now, if you're Indonesian, you might still think, I didn't realize that Minang, Javanese, and Sundanese mixed would look like this. I didn't know either. However, this is where it gets even more confusing from my mom's side because the only distant foreign ancestry I have, also I'm doing the Painted by Esther blush technique and I'm really nervous because I don't know if I'm doing it right, but fingers crossed. But anyways, the only distant foreign ancestry that I know of and that I can actually trace back is from my uti, and that is my uti's paternal grandmother. Like, that is very far back. That is, I think, 5 generations back, but I could be wrong because math. So she was, from what I know, she's from Kalimantan, so she's fully from that island. She is half Dayak, so her dad is Dayak, and her mother is mainland Chinese. And if you don't know the history of those people, there's basically a name for it in Indonesian, which is called Peranakan, which is where a lot of, and I could be wrong, so please fact check this yourself, but if I'm not mistaken, it is from people in mainland China immigrating to areas in Southeast Asia, whether that be like Singapore or Malaysia or parts of Indonesia. Yeah, so they immigrated from China to parts of Indonesia. So in my case, she immigrated from, and I think it was the south of China, because we tried to trace it back and she didn't really, again, we could be wrong because obviously she's not alive to like validate this, but I'm pretty sure she was like bordering on Vietnam, like the south of China, because she does look very like southern Chinese. And so yeah, so she was half Chinese and half Dayak. And so if you think about it, that's 5 generations back, but somehow I still look like this and I still look like her. So I don't know what is in her genes, but her genes are strong as hell. And what I find even funnier, and this is like off topic, but what I find even funnier is that my cousins from my mom's side who have kids, all their kids look like my cousins. They don't look like the parents. Like literally I have about 2 sets of cousins from my mom's family where the kids, and it's like 2 kids from each, look exactly like my cousins. Like they don't look like their parents at all. And I'm scared. And so this is, I guess, a disclaimer to my future husband. If I ever have kids, might have to just let go with the looking like him department, because it might end up like me. So, but anyways, I bring that up because I think there's this very ugly assumption in Indonesia that if you have certain features, you must be mixed. So you must be either mixed, you know, Chinese Indonesian or white Indonesian. Just, you can't be fully Indonesian. And the lingo for that is keturunan, which means like inherited, I think. And clearly from my history, I am not. But I grew up being read that way constantly. And I still am often being read that way. Growing up, my kakung had a very affectionate term for me that he would only use for me, and that is amoy, which I googled. Okay, I just googled, and it's a colloquial term for a young woman or girl. So that was the nickname that my kakung gave to me, because that was actually what he called my mom when she was a kid, because again, I look exactly like my mom. And so affectionately, it was used as a term of endearment. And from him, it came from love and appreciation. But outside of his arms, it really didn't feel the same. Growing up being misread brings a very particular kind of loneliness. I feel like sometimes people don't really acknowledge the dissonance that exists when you've been mislabeled or been mistaken for someone else. Like, for example, being put in a box that was never yours. And whilst most of the time there's no malicious intent behind it, I still feel like it is a wound that is just constantly picked at multiple times. Growing up, I looked completely different from the rest of my family. I mean, I looked like my mom, which was great, because no one said that I looked like my dad in a wig. No tea, no shade. But both of my siblings inherited more of my dad's Minang features. So by that I mean they both inherited a taller nose bridge, or bigger eyes, or a more angular jaw. Just features that were, I guess you could say, classically pretty by Indonesian standards. Whereas me, I got my mom's face, and in that I got my uti's face, which are softer features and a flatter nose bridge and smaller eyes and that kind of stuff. And I think this is a very universal experience for Southeast Asian kids, but if you grew up with a flatter nose bridge, your nose would get pinched as a baby. Like, they would just keep doing that so that they believe, I guess it's a myth, because like, girl, that's bone. Like, but I remember as a child being told that the reason why I don't have a tall nose bridge is because I refused that as a child. Like as a baby, I just hated it. I was like, no. Oftentimes, I definitely felt like the odd one out. And kids, including my own siblings or my cousins, made sure that I knew that I was the odd one out. I mean, the strongest memories that I have at that age are being told that I was adopted from the streets of Guangzhou, and me running to my mom telling that, you know, my siblings just said I was adopted. Am I actually adopted? Like, you have to be honest with me. And my mom, being my mom, bless her, her response was always, you came out of me. I saw it. I have the photos. And I was like, oh, interesting. I don't want to see it anymore. And honestly, I also happened to look like Dora the Explorer at that age. So it honestly feels like it didn't help my case at all when it comes to being bullied. So when you're a child and people tell you, either directly or indirectly, that you look wrong or you look different, you believe them because you don't have context to push back yet. So naturally you just absorb it and internalize a lot of the voices that were never even yours in the first place. And so being a child looking for reassurance, the first person that I would go to was either my mom or my uti. And I remember crying as a child because, again, I've been made to feel different and weird and wrong and all that kind of stuff. And my uti's response was to always just remind me that we share something, that my face is in her face. And she did it so consistently that I can still hear her voice whenever I think about it. Oftentimes, those people who love us correctly don't always make grand speeches about it. Sometimes it's just a grandmother who keeps calmly pointing out that you look like her over and over until you yourself believe it. And to me, that quiet, consistent love matters more than any single grand gesture ever could. So last year, something actually happened that might seem insignificant to anyone else experiencing it, but to me it actually became the catalyst of my acceptance. So I was at my uncle's funeral and my uti's youngest brother was there. So for context, he is actually 25 years younger than her. And I know you might be thinking, 25? I know, I bring it up with my mom all the time. I'm like, what were they doing? God knows. Right? But anyways, given that I live in Australia full time, I don't get to see him that often because obviously he's in Jakarta. And it was my first time seeing him in about, I want to say like, I don't remember if we met after COVID. It's my first time seeing him in minimum a year. And he said, "Cantik banget. Lama-lama kamu yang paling mirip Uti." And after he said it, I kind of brushed it off because I was like, stop. You know, I was blushing a little bit. And at the funeral, I held it together. I smiled, I said thank you, and I moved on. But when I was in the car on the way home, I absolutely lost it. Like, full ugly cry, AirPods to the max, blasting sad music, because I realized the features that I spent so long hating, whether that be the flat nose bridge or the smaller eyes, were the features that made her brother look at me and immediately think of his sister. The things that I actually internalized and were taught to see as less than turned out to be the things that made me feel the most connected to her. And so whenever I do my makeup now and look in the mirror, I see my uti. And finally, after years and decades, that feels like a gift. And I think this is just my inner sentimentalist, if that's even a word, coming out. I find it really sweet that given that they have a 25-year age gap, the face that he probably saw, because she did end up sort of becoming his guardian, was my face. And so the face of me at 25 is probably what he saw growing up. This interaction made me realize that your features are not a consolation prize. They are a lineage and they tell a history. They are the parts of you that were told were wrong might be the parts that connect you most deeply to the people who came before you. And that reframe doesn't come overnight, but it's something that's worth working towards. And to be honest, it is something that I find a lot of pride in because my uti passed 15 years ago now. So as I said, I often came to my mom for reassurance. and sometimes that extended to my aunts. And honestly, I don't tell this story to shame them, but it kind of made me realize what I didn't want to pass down to my kids or future generations. So whenever I was insecure with my features growing up, the standard response that I would get whenever I would express my insecurity was always, don't worry, your future husband will have a sharp nose bridge. Or we have this term in Indonesia, which again, I low-key hate because it's giving eugenics, but the term is memperbaiki genetik, which means to fix your genes, essentially, which I know sounds crazy to say in English, but it was always something along those lines of, don't worry, you will find someone who can fix whatever you have. And so the underlying message of both was, don't worry, you will find someone else to fix your insecurities. And as a kid, I really dreamt of a Prince Charming to, you know, save me and to also fix my genes, apparently. And as I got older, I really learned to question that narrative. Not because I wanted to be rebellious, even though a little part of me was, but I questioned the narrative because I asked, first of all, what's wrong with my features? And why does my face need fixing? And ultimately, after getting a bit older and learning about the world and learning about the world of eugenics and that kind of stuff, I thought, ew, because I felt that it was an insult to the women who came before us, whether that be my mom or my uti or her mother and all the women whose faces live in mine. To say those features need correcting by importing DNA from someone else, and foreign DNA if that, I ultimately feel that that is erasing them. And I refuse to be with someone purely because of the fact that they're foreign. It made me realize how colonialist the mindset still was, and honestly made me question why we kept pushing this, oh, foreign is better narrative. Also, the solution was always about what my future children would look like. And so I asked, what about me? And what about my worth right now in this face as I am? Again, I don't say this to shame, but I just noticed that oftentimes when we go to adults for reassurance when it comes to our insecurities, the default is to always go to a future fix by saying you'll grow into it or you'll find someone who likes that. And call me an optimist, but I think underneath everything they mean well, but it inherently teaches us that the goal is to be acceptable for someone else someday, rather than being acceptable to ourselves right now. And I really had to rewire my brain patterns and remind myself that my face doesn't need a future version of itself to be valid, because it's valid as it is today. And now we get into colorism, because skin color and colorism is still very much rampant, and I personally think that it is a little bit like a disease. One of my first concrete experiences and memories of colorism was actually when I was around about 8 years old. I was a really outdoorsy kid. I was very much tomboyish. Like, I didn't get into makeup until I was about 12. So between the ages of, yeah, like 7 to 11 or 12, I often played outside and often did it with my brother. And at that time, there was no concept of sunscreen. And so if I could go back and talk to 8-year-old Angie, I would yell at her to put on sunscreen. And so one of my earliest, most concrete memories of colorism was my mom telling me, "Nggak apa-apa kamu gelap sekarang, nanti mami ajarin lulur biar putih." And if you don't know what lulur is, it is a Indonesian traditional sort of like body scrub. People do it for like a ritual and that kind of stuff, but generally it's used to brighten the skin, because obviously it's a scrub, so you get rid of your dead skin cells and all that kind of jazz. And to be honest, I think good intentions were there because I was a dirty kid. But at the same time, it's that phrase, biar putih, which really irks me, because if you translate that, if you directly translate that, it becomes so you can get white or to be white, but you can also say that is to be lighter or so you can be lighter. And I even remember as a child being told that the reason why she believes that my sister was pale was because she drank a lot of coconut water when she was pregnant with my sister, hence why she thinks that that's the reason why my sister is actually fairer than me and my brother. But I don't want to argue with her, so I kind of just let her live in that fantasy. But we both know that that's just not how biology works, and my dad is actually like my skin color and I'm considered white in Indonesia, so 1 + 1 = 2. So that was my experience. Now, I can't speak on behalf of my brother, but my brother is actually darker than my sister and I. He's, I think, what you would consider in Indonesia is like sawo matang, which is like tan. And again, I can't speak on behalf of him and his experiences, but just from what I've observed, he got brutal comments growing up. And I remember seeing it. A child being made to feel like something was wrong with him because of his skin color. And till this day, I still get comments saying, oh, it's so nice that you're puti. You know, you're so pretty because you're puti. And that kind of stuff. And honestly, I feel weird about it. Because whilst it's intended to be a compliment, they're labeling me as beautiful based on something I didn't choose or I didn't earn. And in doing so, it implies that the women who don't share the same features or similar features are less. Ultimately, that is not a compliment. That is a system and a hierarchy. And I actually have a very, very sad but realistic example of this, because I have a driver in Indonesia, and mind you, he is a 32-year-old grown-ass man, and he recently had a son, and he told me that he's glad that his son got his wife's lighter coloring, and he was putting himself down purely because of his skin color. And mind you, in Indonesia, he is what you would consider as like normal skin color, like, you know, just your typical Indonesian man coloring. So when people say that beauty standards exclusively impact women, I would beg to differ. Whilst I do agree that women are held to a higher standard and are expected to uphold that beauty standard more, and I would just say that it impacts men too. And to think that in Indonesia, it's still a sort of belief that people who have lighter skin tone are automatically more desirable than people who have a darker skin tone still baffles me, especially in this day and age, because it just proves to you that colorism isn't shallow. It's a system who determines who gets more attention, who gets hired, who gets called beautiful, and who gets taken seriously. And unfortunately, it gets reproduced through parents and aunts and uncles and cousins and grandparents, everything. And usually without anyone meaning any harm. Noticing it isn't being oversensitive, and talking about it isn't being divisive. Because in order to improve, we need to point it out. And it's necessary for us to not perpetuate this stereotype or this belief. And for the record, if anyone cares, I personally find tanner skin more attractive, and a lot of my girlfriends who I'm close with also feel the same way. So the idea that lighter skin is inherently more desirable is not even the slightest bit true. So let me get into my trauma with a capital T, because this is where it gets real juicy, in my opinion. So that was my childhood. Now when I get to my teen years is where it feels like I was sent to the depths of hell and very barely came out. So when I was in my early to mid-teens, like maybe around 13 or 14, there was a movie that came out with Mae Whitman and who's that guy that's like really, really popular at that time? I forgot his name. Rob something. But it starred Mae Whitman, which I know for sure. And it was a movie called The Duff. And it was about a teenage girl in high school who miraculously had the hottest guy in school fall in love with her even though she was the Duff. And Duff basically means designated ugly fat friend. And me at that age, I definitely felt like that. I mean, I am the opposite of petite. I've always grown up curvy, and I'm 5'7", which is like 170 centimeters in a country where I think the average height for women is like 5'2", 5'3". So I felt like Godzilla. even going back home, I feel like Godzilla. And at that time I had acne and braces and I wore glasses. I mean, I still do. And you get me at 15, 16 trying to reclaim that narrative, even when nobody necessarily put it on me openly. I remember watching that movie and fully identifying with it because I really did see a lot of myself in her, in the sense of, you know, my friends were the quote-unquote hotter ones and I didn't really get male attention until I reached my 20s, and that's for a separate video. But yeah, I didn't really experience that sort of like quintessential high school experience of having boyfriends and that kind of stuff. And so it might have done something up here. And honestly, looking back, my friends were really sweet because they weren't mean about it at all. And one of them actually hated whenever I would refer to myself as that. But I felt like I was so behind. I mean, they had boyfriends back to back and I was the single one, or the chronically single one. And I spent years trying to figure out why I was so behind and why I felt undesired. Because as a child, I internalized a lot of those feelings of what's wrong with me. And whilst I grew up in the sort of like very early eras of social media, it was really difficult because oftentimes it made it worse. Every algorithm confirmed the story that I was already telling myself. And I still didn't fulfill Indonesian beauty standards. I mean, I'm not petite, I don't have the right features, you know, wrong height, wrong weight, and everything. And I felt like I was in this awkward in-between. And I didn't realize then that the in-between isn't failing, that it's just a place. If you're in your teens or in your early 20s and you feel behind in life, in dating, in confidence, in feeling desirable, I just want you to know that you're not behind. And I wish someone told me that when I was younger. And I know it's easier said than done and you probably heard it before, but you really are on your own timeline. Oftentimes the version of beauty and desirability that you've been handed was designed without you in mind. And that's not your failure, because that just shows the flaws in the standard, and that's the standard's failure. So then, just as I start to have a grasp of understanding what beauty standards are and how it impacts me and reclaiming that narrative, I moved to Australia and I was in a boarding school. So it was a very interesting environment because it was predominantly white, very skinny, athletic girls with features that I wished for. And within 5 minutes of being there, I realized, oh, I am playing by a completely different set of rules. I can't believe I'm admitting this on camera, but I actually had a phase where I absolutely loved colored contact lenses. Like, I'm wearing them right now and they're like a hazel green sort of color. But back then I loved Solotica. I think that was the brand. I don't even know if they're still in business, but I loved their lenses. And they had these really bright lenses that obviously look artificial, but to me, I was gaslighting myself into saying, oh my god, this looks so natural. And at that time, you would have needed to pry those Solotica blue lenses away from my cold, dead hands before I, took them off. And I remember I was like 16 when I kind of got into them because I was in year 11, and I remember finding them, and at that time the reason why I did that was because I wanted to dye my hair, but I wasn't allowed to by my mom. But it was also a sort of like thing that I could do to kind of make me fit in a bit more. And I only realized that now because at that time I only thought, ooh, blue contact lens is cool. And looking back, it was a moment, but I realized that it was because of the fact that I felt so different from everyone else, and that was the only way that kind of made me feel like I could fit in. Another thing that was so different was learning about fake tan. So just imagine this. I spent years of my life being told that my skin was too dark and I should start using lulur. And I arrive in Australia and suddenly having darker skin was actually the norm. And I remember the way everyone in that boarding house would abuse fake tan before events, like the night before. And the whole boarding house smelled like that fake tan smell of like coconut and whatever the hell it was. And some girls would actually get permission to leave the boarding house the night before an event to get a spray tan. And honestly, I don't shame them because, again, dedication, and I respect that. But at the same time, it was definitely a very weird feeling to see someone who had sort of the ideal skin tone of what I was supposed to have as a child, to then fake tanning to a color that is darker than me and my brother. So I actually have a funny story about this because I remember having an event and it was like my year 12 like farewell dinner, and I wanted to buy fake tan. And I was at Woolies with my mom, and we were at the cashier, and she found it and she was like, what is this? And I was like, oh, it's to make, you know, my skin darker so it looks like one color. And she fully cracked the shits, and to this day kind of find it really funny and ironic in a way, because the girl whose mom just years earlier was talking about lulur to lighten her skin is now trying to buy something to make herself darker. And I find it really funny as well because, you know, we were at the cashier sort of like arguing in Indonesian and the cashier person was probably just like, I'm just trying to get through today. And so the irony was almost poetic in a way, but it's sort of horrifying if you sit and think about it too long. Australia was definitely a lot more open when it came to body size in some ways, because the fixation on being kecil and like petite wasn't the same. And it was actually very humbling because in Indonesia I went from being one of the tallest girls, if not the tallest girl in my class, to being average. And I honestly hadn't realized how much that weighed on me until it suddenly wasn't a thing anymore. The fact that beauty standards are so different between countries and even between decades tell you something important. And that is that they are not the truth. They are trends and they're constructed. They shift and oftentimes contradict each other. A standard that says that you're too dark in one country says that you're not tan enough in the other. And that inconsistency is proof that none of it is actually about you. As I said, I went to a predominantly white private school, which means there was a very specific type of exclusion, and it was the kind that doesn't really announce itself loudly. It's in who gets noticed, who gets remembered, and who is considered cool or popular. One of the craziest things that I remembered experiencing was I often got mistaken for other Asian girls, constantly, either by students or even worse, staff, and one time the vice principal, which is crazy. And younger me would have definitely sort of told myself to kind of suck it up and be like, oh, whatever, it's not that big of a deal. But adult me is calling it what it is, and it's a microaggression. And I was definitely too young and too polite to say anything back then, but looking back at it, I'm definitely seeing it now for what it is. There was a period where I genuinely wished that I was white, which is crazy to say. And it wasn't because I hated being Indonesian, because on the contrary, it was actually something that made me feel like I had something. But I wanted to be that just to fit in, just for boys to notice me, and just to not feel like an outsider in a place that I was supposed to be calling home. And that is a heavy thing to carry, whether you're an adult, a child, and for me in that case, a teenager. And I want to say that it's also completely an understandable thing. It's what happens when you're surrounded by one standard and you just want to belong somewhere. I've observed a couple scenarios where people feel this way. And it's really disappointing to see that oftentimes the first response is shame. And I want to remind anyone who's feeling this way, and even younger me, that if you've ever wished that you look different, whether that be a different race or different features or different skin, the wish doesn't make you a traitor to yourself, because it makes you human. It's what happens when the world narrows its definition of beauty and you're standing outside of it. The work isn't necessarily to shame yourself for having that wish or to pretend that that wish doesn't exist altogether. It's to slowly and patiently expand your own definition of beauty until you're inside it. In the current social media landscape, it is very hard to avoid conversations surrounding plastic surgery or looks maxing. And I hate that word, by the way. But I want to make sure that I'm touching on this topic well, because it is something that I feel like, again, is very personal to each individual person. But I want to preface by saying that I am not anti-plastic surgery at all. I've had friends who have had fillers or nose jobs or a chest augmentation. And honestly, I give all my power to them and all my props to them, because it's not easy and it's a very brave thing to actually want to do something about that. And I myself am a firm believer in your body being your choice, and that's that. What I do take issue with is the shame that exists on both ends of the spectrum. Shame on people who get work done and shame on people who don't. There's obviously a very large discourse on looks maxing online, and I really don't agree with it, because I personally feel from the language and from the way it makes people feel that their face is a project with a deadline. Like, if you're not optimizing, you're failing. And to that I say, let people live. Let people be chopped. I'm kidding. Again, I joke. But what I do find issue with is how it really dehumanizes people's face and people's features. Because call me woo-woo, call me sentimentalist, call me sensitive, whatever. But whenever I think of my face or someone else's face, I think of these stories that their faces carry. And you might have heard that saying of like, your face is the amalgamation of so many people who fell in love before you and came together. And people's rebuttals are like, but my parents had an arranged marriage, whatever. And to that I say, whilst it's a very hopeless romantic take to say that, you know, your face is the result of people in love for hundreds and thousands of years, I'd like to say that it is the direct result of people who were resilient, who lived through things that we could barely even imagine. And that's why I think it's so important to just let people live. With today's landscape, I think transparency matters. And in a world where filters are indistinguishable from real skin and surgery results are often passed off as good genes, being honest about what you've had done is how we will rewrite the narrative or destigmatize it. And I sympathize with this narrative more because of the fact that younger people, you know, people younger than me, I mean, I'm still 25, but people younger than me who are 12 and 14, and if I lived through this era at this age, I would be so confused about what's real and what's not, and why the hell I know what Botox is, you know, at the age of 14. And we shouldn't have to shrink ourselves, whether that be our worth or sense of self, to fit a standard that wasn't built for us anyway. The most radical thing you can do for yourself is to opt out of the shame entirely. Both the shame of changing yourself and the shame of not. And your relationship with your own face or your own body is yours, and no one else gets a vote. And so my transparency is that I don't have any work done. I've never gotten any Botox or fillers and that kind of stuff, mainly because I'm scared of needles, and I've come a long way from wanting a nose job at 12 because I was so sick of being bullied all the time, to now actually being accepting of the features that I once hated. And you never know, that might change, because I might get Botox at 30 or want something altered, but I really do want to make sure that I'm being honest with myself and asking myself, where is this coming from? And if I do get something done, I want to make sure that it comes from me, something that I actually genuinely want, not because someone else told me to. So with my frontal lobe fully developed, here's where I've landed. I don't hate myself or how I look, which, if you've heard the earlier parts of this, you understand that that's not nothing. It took me years, and it took time. It took my 20s and perspective and old photos of my mom and my uti at my age and seeing my own face in there. It took a grand uncle at a funeral saying that the older I get, the more I look like my grandma, and me finally understanding that my features are not a problem to be solved because they're a lineage. Now, whilst I have talked about my struggles and my struggles are valid, I also need to acknowledge my privilege here, because it would be dishonest and performative not to. Being paler skinned in Indonesia is a form of privilege in a country that still operates under colorism. Being pribumi and Muslim is a form of privilege too. My experience, whilst real and valid, is a hell of a lot easier than what people who have darker skin than me or people from the eastern parts of Indonesia, whether that be Papua or Maluku or NTT, among others, face every day. Women who look stereotypically Indonesian or from the eastern parts of Indonesia oftentimes navigate a beauty standard that doesn't even consider them and wasn't built with them in mind at all. And whilst I'm just one person talking about my experiences, I'm here to use my privilege and my voice to create a dialogue and a conversation challenging it. Because whilst, again, the last thing that I want is to speak over anyone's experiences and anyone else's feelings, what I can do is talk about mine and highlight what has failed us and urge to change the narrative. Beauty standards are not just neutral. They're not just aesthetic. They're systems built in place to tell people who belongs, who's desirable, who gets to take up space, and they get reproduced through the people around us, whether that be our parents or through classrooms or through the media that we consume. But I genuinely believe that beauty can be found in everything, in every face, in every shade, in every person who got surgery or those who didn't, and even in people who were told that they didn't even fit in. The most radical thing we can do is to refuse to shrink, to refuse to reduce our worth to our physical appearance, and to refuse to reproduce the standard uncritically. I'm still at the very start of my journey, and I know I have a lot more unlearning to do, but I'm honestly really glad that I get to do it here with you. Healing your relationship with your appearance isn't vanity, and it's actually one of the quietest, most powerful things that you can do. Whether that be for yourself, the people who came before you, and if you choose to, the people who will come after you. The daughter or niece, little cousin, or even just some kid on the street who will one day look to you to understand what beauty really means. Whilst it's not our fault that we were born with a cycle, we have a choice to break it. And we have a choice to also let other people see how we treat ourselves well. So that is it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed. If any of this resonated with you, especially if you're Indonesian or you grew up navigating multiple beauty standards at once, I'd love to hear your experience and any takes of yours, because deep down I know that I'm not the only one with these stories. And especially as a woman, it's very hard to navigate a society with a standard that oftentimes thrives on the fact that you are insecure. And as I said, the work isn't to feel ashamed, but it's to slowly and patiently define what beauty means to you and how you can carry that with you. That's it for today's video. So I hope you enjoyed. Please let me know your thoughts and your opinions. I know that I'm not the only one with these stories, and I really want to keep a discussion or a conversation going, because my story is just one story. And if you've watched this far, I hope you can take something away from this video. And if not, I thank you for spending the time with me anyway. Please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hype, and share to someone who you feel would like this video. And yeah, stay tuned, because I'm on a roll recently, so we'll continue to make more. And yeah, I hope you are having a great day or night wherever you are, and stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy, and I'll see you soon.